They had a gun pressed against a 7-year-old's temple. I'm not talking about some movie scene. I'm not talking about something I heard about secondhand. I was there. I watched a grown man, tattoos on his neck, gold teeth, hands that had done terrible things, crouch down to the height of a little boy named Marcus and press the barrel of a Glock right against the side of his head. And Marcus didn't even cry. That's what destroyed me. That little boy just closed his eyes like he had already learned somewhere in his short 7 years that crying doesn't help. That silence, that awful, heartbreaking silence, is what made Rico Alvarez walk through that door alone, hands up, no weapon, no backup, just him, just the Iron Saint. That image never left me. And if you want to understand why a man like Rico, a man the streets had written off as pure evil, walked into that room to trade his life for a child's, then I need to take you back to where this story really starts. Back to the version of Rico nobody ever talked about. Now, if you enjoy stories like this, real, raw, human stories, take a second to like the video, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I genuinely read every single one. And please, share this with somebody who loves real-life drama. It means everything. All right, let's go back. Rico Alvarez was 43 years old when I met him. And the first thing you noticed wasn't the leather vest or the road-worn boots or even the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. The first thing you noticed was how still he was. Most dangerous men move a lot. They fidget, they pace, they need you to see them. Rico just sat there like he was the center of gravity in whatever room he walked into. I was a social worker back then, fresh out of my 2nd year on the job, still believing I could fix things. My supervisor had sent me to follow up on a noise complaint near the corner of Delano and 9th, a commercial building in a part of town where social workers didn't usually linger after 4 in the afternoon. I almost didn't go in. The building looked abandoned from the outside, broken gutters, faded paint, windows you couldn't see through. But I could hear something from the sidewalk, laughing, kids laughing, which made absolutely no sense. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Then the door opened just enough for one eye to look at me, and when that eye was attached to a teenage girl, maybe 16, who looked at my badge like it was a weapon. "We don't need anything," she said. "I'm not here to take anyone," I told her. "I just need to check that everyone's okay." She shut the door. I should have left, I know that now. But something kept my feet on that step, some feeling I couldn't name. So I waited. And about 4 minutes later, the door opened all the way, and Rico Alvarez was standing there in that leather vest, arms crossed, looking at me the way a man looks at something he's trying to decide is a threat. "You lost?" he said. "No," I said. "Are those your kids?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I remember thinking, this is where I die. I genuinely thought that. I had heard the name Iron Saint before. Every social worker in the county had, and he was the kind of name that got said in whispers. 3 arrests, 2 convictions, associates with 3 different motorcycle clubs with documented gang ties. The department had a whole file, but then something happened that I still think about. From somewhere behind him, a small voice said, "Rico, Deja spilled the soup again." And Rico and this man, this legend, this supposed monster, turned around and said, "Tell her it's okay, just get the towels under the sink." Just like that, calm, patient, like a father. He turned back to me and something in his eyes had shifted, like a curtain had moved an inch and I'd seen something through it before it closed again. "Come back tomorrow," he said quietly, "with no badge showing. We'll talk." Then he shut the door. I stood there on that sidewalk for probably 2 full minutes, not moving. And because I had just seen something that didn't fit any story I'd been told about this man. And I didn't know whether to be relieved or more afraid than before. I went back the next day, probably the second biggest mistake of my life. The first? I kept going back after that, because what Rico showed me on the inside of that building, the cots, the meal rotations, the homework corner, the mural on the back wall that the kids had painted themselves, it didn't match anything the street said about him. There were 11 children in that building, ages 4 to 15, all of them discarded, all of them invisible to the system that was supposed to protect them. And Rico was the only reason they were still alive. What I didn't know then, what I had absolutely no idea about it, was where the money was coming from, and what it was going to cost him. I found that out later, much, much later, and by then it was already too late to stop what was coming. The first time I saw Rico hand an envelope of cash to a man I later found out was a drug courier, I told myself I hadn't seen it. That's the honest truth. I looked away. I walked back to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel for 10 minutes. Then I drove home, made dinner, watched TV, and pretended my brain wasn't screaming at me. Because I had spent 6 weeks in that building by then. 6 weeks watching Rico teach a 9-year-old named Dominic how to tie his shoes because nobody had ever bothered. 6 weeks watching a little girl named Priya fall asleep every night clutching a stuffed rabbit Rico had bought her from a gas station because it was the only store open when she'd had a nightmare. I didn't want it to be real, so I decided it wasn't. That was my red flag, and I ignored it the way humans ignore every red flag, by wanting something else to be true badly enough. Rico didn't explain himself easily. That's one thing you need to understand about him. He wasn't the kind of man who sat you down and said, here's my backstory, here's my trauma, here's why I am the way I am. He revealed himself in pieces, tiny pieces, like he was testing how much truth you could hold before you ran. And it was a Tuesday evening. I remember because the kids had spaghetti on Tuesdays and the whole building smelled incredible. When he finally said something real to me. We were sitting outside on the back steps. He was smoking. I wasn't talking because I had learned that silence was the only invitation Rico ever responded to. You want to ask me something, he said, not a question. A lot of things, I admitted. He dragged on the cigarette, exhaled slow. Ask one. I thought about it, then I said, why these kids? Out of everything you could be doing, why this? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, because somebody should have done it for me. Just that. He didn't elaborate. He stood up, flicked the cigarette, and went back inside to help with dishes. But I heard it, and those 8 words told me more about Rico Alvarez than any police file ever could. What I pieced together over the following weeks, partly from Rico, partly from the older kids who'd been around long enough to know things, was this. Rico had been running the shelter for almost 4 years. He called it the Yard, no official name, no nonprofit status, no paper trail. 11 kids at that point, though the number fluctuated. Some aged out, some got placed with relatives. A few, and this one hurt to hear, had gone back to situations Rico couldn't legally stop because he had no legal standing to stop anything. The money came from 2 sources. The first was legitimate. Odd jobs, mechanic work, a small cut from an auto shop 2 blocks over that he co-owned quietly. But that money barely covered food. The real funding, in the money that kept the lights on and the heat running and the medical bills paid, that came from the clubs. From runs he made that he never talked about directly, but that I wasn't naive enough to misunderstand. He was moving money, maybe product, possibly both. And the people he moved it for were not patient men. I met Cesar Vega for the first time on a Thursday that started like any other and ended with me sitting in my car convinced I was going to be sick. Cesar wasn't loud. That surprised me. I had expected loud. He was maybe 35, slim, dressed better than anyone in that neighborhood had any business being dressed. and he walked into the yard like he owned it, because in a certain terrible sense he did. Rico met him at the door. They spoke outside. I watched through a window I probably shouldn't have been standing near. I couldn't hear everything, but I could read the energy. Cesar was doing most of the talking. Rico was listening with his jaw tight and his arms crossed, which I had learned by then was his body's way of holding itself together. At one point, Cesar smiled and put his hand on Rico's shoulder, and I watched Rico go completely still in that way he went still when something was threatening him. Not fear exactly, more like a man standing at the edge of something and calculating the fall. Cesar left. Rico came back inside. He looked at me across the room and something behind his eyes had changed, like a light that had been on was now just barely flickering. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, and went straight to the kitchen. It was not okay. I knew that. He knew I knew. But neither of us said it because some truths are too heavy to hand to another person without warning. 2 days later, I showed up and one of the older boys, 17-year-old JT, who functioned basically as Rico's second-in-command at the yard, pulled me aside before I got through the door. "You need to know something," JT said. He was looking over his shoulder while he talked, which immediately made my skin go cold. "The men who've been coming around," he said, "they're not just Caesar's people anymore. There's another crew, different patch. They've been watching the building." "Watching it for what?" I asked. JT looked at me like I was asking what color the sky was. "They know what this place is now. They know about the kids." He paused. "That's not information people like that keep quiet out of the goodness of their hearts." I asked him if Rico knew. "Rico knows everything," JT said. "That's not the problem." He stopped, swallowed. "The problem is what they're asking him to do about it." Before I could push him further, Rico appeared in the doorway. He looked at JT. JT looked at the ground, and just like that, the conversation was over. But that sentence lived inside my chest for the rest of the day. The problem is what they're asking him to do about it. Because whatever it was, whatever line they were asking Rico to cross, I could see on his face that it was a line even he wasn't sure he could survive crossing. That night I drove past the yard 3 times before going home. Something felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, and the kind of wrong that sits in your stomach and doesn't move. I almost turned back. I didn't, and by morning the choice that Rico had been trying to avoid making had already been made for him. Rico called me at 5:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I stared at my phone screen in the dark for 3 full seconds before I answered, trying to understand why it was ringing before sunrise. His voice when I picked up was flat, controlled. The kind of voice a person uses when they've already cried everything out and what's left is just bone. "I need you to come," he said. "Not as a social worker, just as you." I didn't ask questions. I got dressed in the dark and drove across town with my hands tight on the wheel and my heart doing something irregular in my chest. I think I already knew. Not the details, but the shape of it, in the way you sense a storm before the clouds actually arrive. When I got to the yard, the front door was open. That was the first thing that scared me. Rico never left that door open. He was sitting at the kitchen table alone. No vest, just a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, which somehow made him look more exposed than I'd ever seen him. There was a folded piece of paper on the table in front of him. He didn't touch it while he talked. He just let it sit there like a wound. "They came last night," he said. "Caesar's people and the other crew. Both of them together, which means they worked something out between themselves. Which means whatever they worked out, I'm the payment." I sat down across from him. I didn't speak. "They want me to do a run," he said. "Not product, not money." He stopped, looked at the table. A man, someone who talked to federal investigators. They want him handled before he testifies next month. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. And if you refuse? I asked. Rico picked up the paper, slid it across to me. I unfolded it. It was a printed photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, of the yard, of the front door, of 3 of the younger kids standing on the steps in the afternoon sun, completely unaware they were being photographed. They expose the operation, he said. They tip off the city. This place gets shut down. The kids go into emergency placement, scattered, separated, back into the same system that already failed them. He paused. Or worse. They stop being subtle about it. I set the photo down. Rico, I said carefully, you know I can't tell you to... I'm not asking what you think I should do, he said. And his voice wasn't harsh when he said it, just tired. I already know what I'm not going to do. I just needed to say it out loud to somebody before things get loud. That's when I understood why he'd called me. Not for advice, not for rescue, just for witness. What Rico did next was the bravest and most reckless thing I have ever watched a human being do in my life. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls. I only heard his side of them. The first call was to a man named Ortega, someone I had never heard him mention before. And what I gathered from that conversation was that Ortega was law enforcement adjacent. Not a cop exactly, but connected to people who were. The call lasted 4 minutes. Rico spoke quietly, and he said the name Cesar Vega and the other crew's leader, a man called Toro. And he said a location and a time. I stared at him the entire time. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "Don't react. Just listen." The second call was to JT. He told JT to get every child in the building up, dressed and packed with 1 bag each within the next 40 minutes. He said it like he was asking JT to set the table. Calm. Clear. JT didn't argue. That's how much that 17-year-old trusted Rico. He just said, "Yes, sir," and got moving. The third call, and this one destroyed me, was to a woman named Patricia, a retired school teacher in her 60s who I later found out had known Rico since he was 11 years old. She had been the one adult in his entire childhood who had ever treated him like he mattered. He asked her to open her house, and he said he was sending her some kids. He said he didn't know how long. He said he was sorry for the hour. She said, and I heard this clearly through the phone, "Mijo, I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. I already have the beds." Rico closed his eyes when she said that, just for a second. And in that second I saw everything. Every year of carrying this alone, every night of pretending he was only what the streets said he was. Every morning of making breakfast for children the world had thrown away. It was all right there on his face. Then he opened his eyes, stood up, and became the Iron Saint again. The next 2 hours moved the way emergency always moves. Too fast and strangely slow at the same time. The kids were groggy and confused. Little Marcus, the same boy from the story's beginning, and though I didn't know yet what was coming for him, kept asking where they were going. Rico crouched down to his level, eye to eye, and said, "You're going somewhere safe. You're going somewhere warm. I need you to be brave for me one time. Can you do that?" Marcus studied his face the way children study the faces of adults they love for signs of lying. Then he nodded, gravely, like a small soldier. I helped load them into 2 vehicles. I didn't ask whose vehicles they were. By that point, I had stopped asking certain questions. Rico didn't ride with them. He stood on the sidewalk and watched both vehicles pull away. And I watched him watch them go. His hands were loose at his sides. His face was unreadable, but his right hand, just his right hand, lifted slightly as the last car turned the corner. A wave. The smallest wave in the world. And for 11 children who couldn't see it. I turned to him. "What now?" Now I go have a conversation with Caesar, he said. Alone? I'm not alone. He said it without looking at me. Ortega's people are already in position. Caesar just doesn't know that yet. Then he finally looked at me, and what I saw in his face wasn't fear. It wasn't peace exactly either. It was something in between. The look of a man who has finally stopped running from a version of himself he was always going to have to face. You should know, he said. This was never about redemption for me. I don't think I get that. Those kids needed somebody, and I was there. He said it like it was simple, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Maybe it was. I found out what happened at the warehouse on Delano from the news first, and then from Ortega 6 days later when he agreed to meet me at a diner and speak off record. Cesar Vega was in federal custody by 9 that morning. Toro's crew scattered, 3 arrests, 2 still outstanding. The operation that had been running through Rico's network for 7 years unraveled in under 48 hours. Because Rico had walked into that warehouse wearing a wire and said everything he knew to the one person Cesar never suspected him of talking to. Rico took a bullet in the shoulder before it was over. Ortega told me that with the uncomfortable casualness of someone describing a minor inconvenience. He survived. The charges against him, and there were charges because Rico had not lived a clean life and he never claimed otherwise, were complicated by his cooperation. I won't pretend he walked free, and that's not how these things work. But he didn't disappear either. The yard was documented during proceedings. Patricia testified. JT testified. I testified. The judge, and I will never forget this as long as I live, asked Rico directly why he had cooperated when he knew what it would cost him personally. Rico sat there in that courtroom in a suit that didn't quite fit him right, and he said, "Because 11 kids needed tomorrow more than I needed yesterday." The room was quiet for a long moment after that. Marcus is 14 now. He lives with Patricia. He's on the honor roll. He still has that stubborn habit of closing his eyes when things get overwhelming, but lately I've noticed he opens them faster. Rico writes letters. I've read some of them. They're short, practical, occasionally funny, and they don't talk about sacrifice or legacy or any of the big words people use when they're trying to make sense of a complicated man's complicated life. They talk about whether Dominic is still playing basketball, whether Priya still has the rabbit, whether everybody's eating enough. The Iron Saint, as it turns out, was never really made of iron at all. He was made of the same thing the rest of us are made of. The desperate need to matter to someone before it's over. He just had a harder road to figuring that out than most. And honestly, so do a lot of us. Ashes Under the Leather Vest is complete. If you'd like another story, a different chapter count, or want me to adapt this into a full script format, just say the word.